Another month of summer has passed, and that means another batch of fresh titles have been released for the Playdate catalog. So if you're looking to take your little Pikachu-colored console out to play on the beach, or while laying in a hammock, or while climbing a palm tree to punch some coconuts because, hey, you live life exactly the way you want to, I guess, I'm here to give you this month's rundown on what new games are worth bringing along. First up is Possessions, a game where you play as a restless spirit and use your time in the afterlife to endlessly mess with people's relationships because, well, if we're being real, I'd probably do the same thing. The afterlife would probably get boring without at least a little drama. Possessions bills itself as a puzzle game, but in some way functions as a simple turn-based strategy title. In each level, your goal is to nudge one character's movements at a time to collect drops, which in the game function as points attributable to a relationship between two characters. Maybe the mom bakes cookies, which leaves a +1 drop in the kitchen, and to boost her relationship with her son, you nudge him toward it. Or maybe you possess the mom and push her into the living room right as dad is letting out an aggressively wet fart. Okay, I made that last one up, but you hopefully kinda get the gist. Collect enough drops to meet the level's ending conditions and you win, so long as each character's unpossessed movements don't result in too big a boost to the wrong relationship. If that sounds confusing after I explained it, well, frankly, I was a little confused myself. Possessions tutorial levels are pretty simple, but once you get into the game, there is a lot to keep track of at once. I thought it was a pretty interesting challenge, especially since you get to see each character's next 3 moves at once, so you're given a lot of info to work with. But the amount of mental juggling you have to do may not be everybody's cup of tea. That said, for $3, Possessions isn't asking much of you and is a unique little thing trying hard to do something different. I say for fans of challenging puzzlers, it's worth a look. Next up is Code Wordplay, and let me tell you, this is one sneaky little bastard of a game. This is Wordle in full dominatrix gear brandishing a whip. The idea is you have a 4-letter word to guess and only 3 guesses to get it right. Not only this, but you're at the mercy of an extremely aggressive 1-minute timer, which rapidly reduces your reward for winning the lower it gets. If I stopped describing it there, you would probably think this game sounds mercilessly unfair and is basically impossible, and that's kinda what I thought at first too, but this is not Wordle, and Code Wordplay very deliberately leaves no time for much thought. And the key to this is its positioning clues. Also, much like Wordle, if you lock in a guess, it'll tell you which letters are correct and which are correct but in the wrong position. But even without having to lock in a guess, you'll also be able to see how far apart each letter is from the next in the alphabet. Maybe you know for sure the first letter must be A, you cocky little bugger you, and once you fill it in, the game might tell you the next letter is 3 characters higher, meaning it's D, and so on. So really, it becomes a game of setting the positions of the letters relative to one another properly and figuring out how to make adjustments in record time to get as many points as possible. It's stressful and demands a ton of attention, but my god was I having fun with it. The only real downside of the core gameplay is, at least at first, you're going to be doing a lot of counting. Unless you can right now tell me exactly what letter is 17 positions above A. Stop it, don't even try, you can't do it, you're going to start singing the ABCs just like I did. I should probably mention the coins. As your 1-minute timer counts down, 3 coins that would serve as a reward for correctly guessing the word begin to disappear. And you'll want these coins because the overarching structure of Code Wordplay is sort of like the tiniest roguelite ever made. Coins will buy you equipment that will do things like give you some extra time back, so as you go on, you begin to at least get some tools to help you out along the way. Code Wordplay is the single most stressful word game I have ever played, and really one of the best. At $4, if you have a playdate and have any interest in word games, Code Wordplay is a seriously clever one that ranks among the most unique concepts I've seen on the little handheld. Next in the list of new releases is Gun Trails, probably the best looking game for July 2023. Gun Trails is a traditional bullet hell shoot 'em up with a great, highly detailed 1-bit art style that really shines on the playdate's lo-fi screen. Unfortunately, its visuals are also a major detriment to it in the gameplay department, because Gun Trails is a pretty frustrating bullet hell that probably is only going to appeal to hardcore genre veterans. As the handy guide accessible from the main menu tells you, while your ship is pretty large, its hitbox is the small little coconut-shaped thing in the middle of it, and you must protect it at all costs. The problem is that this is a 1-bit game, and there's no clear way to distinguish the hitbox at a moment's notice with everything else happening on screen. This may be due to the playdate screen size in general, but Gun Trails is the single most claustrophobic bullet hell game I've ever played. There's seemingly barely any room to maneuver around your enemy's speedy projectiles, and even if you manage to do so, your eyes must be laser focused on that hitbox to ensure you're protecting yourself. You shoot with the A button, and racking up enough of a chain with it will power your blast used with the B button. It's pretty standard fare and feels like it should be more fun than it sadly was. For reasons unknown to me, the game also took over a minute to load when I booted it up, which can be a little frustrating for a device where everything is meant to be picked up and played in short bursts. With a lovely art style and a reasonable $6 price point, I have no doubt some bullet hell fans will be intrigued enough to pick up Gun Trails despite despite its frustrations, but everyone else might be better served to try one of my other picks this month. DIG, D-Y-G, is actually an acronym for Dig Your Grave, which is all you'll be doing in this morbid arcade game. Right off the bat, you get no direction whatsoever, and it took me a few minutes to figure out what was happening. DIG exclusively uses the Playdate's crank and asks you to crank it in rhythm with your unfortunate protagonist shovel as they, well, dig their own grave. A line indicating where on the shovel's path your crank should be serves as a guide for a successful dig, and not following it correctly will result in a harsh metallic clank and no progress made. The goal is to dig as far as you can before the sun sets, and you ultimately collapse from heat exhaustion, at least from what I can tell. At $3, Dig is a cheap but pretty shallow little distraction that's ultimately well made, but not likely to capture your attention for long unless you're really into chasing high scores. Next up is Clash Cards, and I won't lie, I almost wanted to immediately give up this one, as its tutorial is just a wall of text explaining its confusing rules, and the first game I tried to play crashed my playdate. But my next try worked reasonably well, and after I played a round or two, the rules started to make some sense. I never completely wrapped my head around them, as some outcomes still had me scratching my head a bit, but my initial concerns were mostly unfounded. The idea is that you place cards on a board turn by turn with your opponent. Each card will have an attack and defense rating indicated by letters and directions in which it'll attack. Based on those scores and the directions present, clashes with other cards may occur, and the attack and defense ratings will calculate who wins the clash. I felt that using letters instead of numbers for these scores probably made the game more confusing than it needs to be, but before long I was having fun and trying hard to think of ways to fool my AI opponent. Despite being billed as a competitive card game, I didn't actually see a way to play against anybody but the AI. There doesn't seem to be a pass and play sort of mode to be able to play locally with your friends, so you're really at the mercy of how entertaining you find your computer opponent. The game also allows you to customize the deck you play games with, which can make things a little more interesting. I tried to build a deck of exclusively high offense and high defense cards thinking I'd immediately win, but the downside is that these cards can attack and defend from fewer directions than less powerful cards. So naturally, my AI opponent exploited this weakness immediately and I decisively lost the match. There's more going on here than it first appeared, and though the game is a bit bare bones in terms of features, overall it's a fun and clever concept that is worth the $3 for those interested in giving it a go. Cranky Bird is a not quite Flappy Bird clone, but intends to take the button mashing bird hovering of Flappy Bird and adapt it into some basic platforming levels on the Playdate, complete with spike traps, water obstacles, and various other environmental hazards. You can either mash the A button to flap or use the crank, which is a bit exhausting, so I opted for the A button instead. Frankly, this game was not my cup of tea. The very simple Game & Watch style animation felt far less satisfying to control than Flappy Bird ever did, and each level was little more than flapping around the environment, avoiding obstacles, and collecting a variety of items before moving to the next stage. Personally, I found it to be pretty dull, and a lot more simplistic than I was hoping for, so I have a hard time recommending this one to anybody but those really eager to fill out their Playdate library. And last but not necessarily least, Bomber Panda is a totally passable Bomberman clone that's good to pick up and play for a few minutes at a time. There's nothing here you never saw in Bomberman. You place bombs to take out enemies and obstacles and ultimately find the exit to each level. Bomber Panda moves really slowly, which I did find got kinda grating, but the core gameplay is fine, and at $2, if you like Bomberman and want a version of it on the Playdate, the price is definitely right. And that concludes this month's batch of Playdate titles. While the overall quality of the Playdate catalog titles has still really varied for me so far, it's comforting to see some of the more clever ones like Code Wordplay and Clash Cards showing up with some interesting design choices that justify my reason for wanting to get and support the Playdate. I'm also just thrilled to see that Playdate devs have started pricing their games more reasonably for the content they provide, with many newer titles costing $2 to $4 and appropriately offering a bite-sized bit of creative game design. Hopefully it delivers even more interesting titles in future months, but until then, hopefully this update gives you some insight into what's worth your time now.